everybody. It's Zach Elliott at Feel Free to Argue. And frankly, I'm getting a little tired of talking about Julian Assange, and yet the things that are happening in relation to this case are just so important that I find myself being dragged back to it again and again and again. So today I want to take the focus a little bit away from Assange and talk about, the suspected originator of the leak, which is Bradley Manning. And explain the title of the video, because there are probably a lot of people who are thinking right now, it's like, well, I think he's just in custody. I haven't heard anything about him being tortured or anything. In order to get into this, I want to first talk about, why I think the way we're holding Bradley Manning is torture. Then I'm going to talk about the charge of collusion that the Justice Department is pursuing at this point. And finally, I want to talk about, the implications for extradition going forward, and just general problems that this is going to lead to. So first, in terms of the torture allegation on my part, mostly this comes from a few details of Manning's incarceration. Now, two things that I think are very important to keep in mind at this point. First of all, Bradley Manning, despite whatever admissions he may have made to that lame-o guy at Wired, has not been in a court of law and has not been proven at this point to be guilty of anything. So I think the most important thing really to be aware of in terms of this whole situation is that this is all pre-trial. The other thing is that by all accounts he has been a model prisoner at this point, not causing any problems. There have been no allegations to that effect. So that being the case, what kind of treatment is he getting? Well, a lot of these things are going to seem very minor to you. They're not going to seem like the kind of aggressive tactics that most people associate with torture. But I'm going to talk a little bit about norms in a second. He's currently in his cell in solitary confinement for 23 hours a day, and has been now for 7 months. Now, the length of time I think is very important here, because this at this point is according to any psychologist that you want to talk to, has already done serious psychological harm to him. I mean, at this point, unquestionably, his brain waves have been altered by this form of incarceration. This is why, and this is to return to the idea of norms, most Western nations, and a lot of other nations, including nations such as Tunisia, like under pressure from Amnesty International. I mean, most of the nations that have any kind of progressive impulse in them at all in the world have rejected long-term solitary confinement as torture. Well, to answer the question of the video, why would the United States government be engaged in something which is against the norms of certainly most of our closest allies in the world? Well, my theory on this is that they are going to do the classic thing that you do when you torture someone. When you torture someone, you're getting them not to reveal information. That's rarely the purpose, and it's not very useful, actually, because you have no way of determining the veracity of the information. And at a certain point, they'll just break down and tell you whatever you want to hear. But that's why, generally speaking, torture is used when there is something that you want to hear. So what does the government want to hear? That has to do with my second point in terms of collusion. They want to pin collusion on Julian Assange, because that gives them a window towards indicting him in the U.S. They now have a charge that has some veneer of respectability, of validity, that they can trot out and say, okay, this is the reason, we have a valid reason for going after Assange, and start working on extradition, which is the goal. To get him in here, to get him in a U.S. jail, and to make an example of him in front of the world. Now, there are many difficulties of this. The primary one is that, as Glenn Greenwald has pointed out, it is just impossible to make a distinction, a legal distinction, between what WikiLeaks is doing and what any decent investigative journalist is doing. I mean, as he pointed out, apparently the people who are thinking that this draws a line between WikiLeaks and legitimate news sources think that leaks just kind of drop out of the sky or appear in your mailbox. And, though that may be exactly what happened to Julian Assange in this case, that is typically not the way things happen. What happens is that an investigative journalist, and it's funny because this is actually, in a way, means that it's more targeted towards investigative journalists than it is against Julian Assange. But it's very much the case, and you could talk to anybody about this. Talk to James Reason, talk to any decent, talk to Jeremy Scahill. What they do is arm twist. They put pressure on people. They say, okay, well, that's a great story. Can you give me some documents? Can you give me some emails? Can you give me some letters? Can you give me something that proves your case? Now, at the exact point that you're saying to your source, can you give me something to prove what you're saying? Which is what any good investigative journalist is going to ask. You are in the government's new definition of collusion. So this is a direct attack on your right to know, as so much of this has been. And it alarms me that nobody seems to be viewing it this way. It is a direct assault on your right to know. So, what other implications are there, aside from the fact that you've essentially lost your right to know? Well, there are serious implications for this country as we slip further and further outside the realm of norms for the world, because many countries will not allow people to be extradited from their country to another country that they feel, that the country they're being extradited to can't guarantee the safety of the person there. The United States is like that. If one of our citizens is, being, they're attempting to extradite them to a country where we think that the government can't guarantee the safety of the person that they're trying to extradite, we don't let them take it. So take that person. So, these other countries have their own standards. A lot of them, there are people right now that we are trying to extradite to the United States from Europe, and they're making, arguments in the EU courts that you can't allow us to be extradited to the United States because the United States does not subscribe to world norms on the treatment of incarcerated peoples. So there you go. Those are, so this affects our legitimate interests as much as, what I view as our clearly illegitimate interests with vis-a-vis, Julian Assange. So you have all of these problems. And once again, they're related to our use of torture. And I don't know. This whole situation just seems to be getting crazier and crazier by degrees. And it's stunning how few people in the mainstream media are talking about this at all. And warning people at all about what the implications of this stuff are. Because, I mean, how are investigative journalists supposed to conduct their work? And don't think it's just only applied to WikiLeaks. Already, there are calls going out for, prosecution of the New York Times and anybody else, who releases this information. James Reason, probably one of the best investigative reporters in the country, has had to beat back, numerous attempts by the government to find out who his sources are and to put him in jail for not revealing them. So this is desperately serious stuff. It's very real, and it has an effect on your ability to know things right now. So I don't even know what to tell you to do. I just want you to know this stuff. This has been Zach Elliott, and you can certainly feel free to argue, please. Argue with me. Tell me I'm wrong.